Bullies pick on the wrong new black twins, thinking they're just quiet girls from the city. They mock them, humiliate them, and try to break them day after day. But what no one knows is that these girls have been training since they were 5. Not to fight for sport, but to survive. And when the bullies finally cross the line, the twins don't run or cry. They strike. What happens when cruelty meets calm and hatred meets the kind of strength you can't see coming? Before we get into the story, comment below where in the world you are watching from today. And if you like this story, don't forget to subscribe. The morning fog clung to the streets of Belridge like a thick blanket, turning streetlights into hazy orbs in the gray dawn. The yellow school bus rumbled through the quiet neighborhoods, its diesel engine the only sound breaking the stillness. Inside, Zuri and Zara sat perfectly still in the back seat, their matching navy blue uniforms crisp and spotless, their braids tied with white ribbons that matched their pressed collar shirts. Around them, other students pushed and laughed, their voices echoing off the metal ceiling. A boy threw a paper airplane that sailed over their heads. A girl shrieked with laughter as her friend showed her something on a phone. But the twins remained still, their hands folded neatly in their laps, taking in every detail without seeming to look at anything at all. Zara's fingers twitched slightly when a particularly loud laugh burst out nearby. Zuri's hand moved just an inch closer to her sister's, their pinkies touching, a silent reminder of their presence for each other. Their brother Micah's words from that morning echoed in their minds. Watch, listen, learn. The bus pulled into Belridge Elementary's circular drive, brakes squealing as it came to a stop. The twins waited until the pushing crowd of students had passed before standing up, their movements synchronized without trying. They stepped off the bus into the misty morning air, their polished shoes clicking against the concrete. The hallways of Belridge Elementary buzzed with activity. Locker doors slammed, sneakers squeaked against the freshly waxed floors, and everywhere there were stares. Quick glances, double takes, whispers behind hands. Did you see? Are they from the city? I heard. The twins moved through it all like water around stones, neither speeding up nor slowing down. Their footsteps matched perfectly, echoing in the spaces that fell quiet as they passed. Mrs. Keating appeared in front of them, her smile so wide it looked painful. Her floral dress matched the bright, artificial cheerfulness of her expression. Welcome, welcome. You must be our new students. Let's see. She glanced down at a paper in her hand. Zara and Zuri, right? Zara, she pointed at Zuri. And Zuri, she pointed at Zara. The twins didn't correct her. They simply nodded, their faces carefully neutral, their posture remaining perfect. Mrs. Keating's smile flickered for just a moment, unsettled by their stillness. In class they sat side by side, their notebooks open to clean pages, pencils perfectly aligned with the edge of their desks. From 2 rows back, a whispered voice carried just loud enough to hear. Look at the project princesses acting all proper. Zara's jaw tightened slightly. Zuri's breathing remained steady, but her pencil pressed a fraction harder against her paper as she wrote the date. The morning dragged into lunch period. The cafeteria was a sea of noise and movement, filled with the clatter of trays and the smell of reheated food. The twins stood in line, watching as student after student received steaming plates of pasta. When they finally reached the front, the warmers were nearly empty. The lunch lady scraped the bottom of the pan, serving them cold noodles with sauce that had already started to congeal. They found seats at the edge of the cafeteria, away from the clusters of chattering students. From across the room, Ms. Ray, the science teacher, watched them over her coffee cup. Her face showed nothing, but her dark eyes missed nothing. Not the way other students gave their table a wide berth, not the whispers that followed the twins, not the way they ate their cold lunch without complaint. The rest of the day passed in a blur of new teachers, new classrooms, and more stares. When the final bell rang, the twins walked back to the bus stop with the same measured pace they'd maintained all day. They sat in the same back seat, hands folded, watching the town pass by through foggy windows. At home, they removed their backpacks with careful movements, hanging them on hooks by the door. They did their homework at the kitchen table, ate dinner in near silence, and went to bed early, knowing what waited for them before dawn. The alarm went off at 4 a.m., though both were already awake. They changed into workout clothes in the dark, their movements practiced and silent. In the backyard, dew soaked through their shoes as they walked across the grass to where Micah waited. Their brother stood shirtless in the pre-dawn darkness, his military tattoos visible even in the dim light. His face was serious, focused, as he watched them take their positions. Without a word, they began their routine. Deep stretches came first, lunges that burned their thighs, twists that worked their core. Balance poses followed, the twins standing on one leg, then the other, arms extended, breathing controlled. To anyone watching, it might have looked like yoga, but there was purpose in every movement, power building in their muscles, precision in their form. Micah moved between them, adjusting an elbow here, a foot there. His touches were light but firm, showing rather than telling. The only sounds were their controlled breathing and the occasional distant car. Finally, Micah spoke, his voice low and steady. One day they'll push too far. When that happens, you won't flinch. You'll finish. The twins held their final pose, their breath steady, their eyes focused on the lightening horizon. They understood. This wasn't just exercise. It was preparation. For what? They didn't yet know. But they would be ready. The morning sun cast long shadows through the hallway windows of Belridge Elementary as Zuri and Zara stood by their lockers, exchanging books for their next class. Their movements were synchronized, each sister pulling out textbooks and notebooks with practiced efficiency. The hallway buzzed with the usual between-class chaos, but a subtle shift in the energy made both twins pause. Callie appeared first, her designer backpack slung carelessly over one shoulder, flanked by Brent and Sawyer. They positioned themselves in a loose semicircle, blocking the twins' path to class. Callie's lips curved into a smirk, her eyes moving between the two sisters with calculated amusement. "You two always look so happy," Callie said, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "That's creepy, you know." Brent snickered, and Sawyer shifted his weight, trying to make himself look bigger. The twins responded with identical serene smiles, the ones they'd practiced in their bathroom mirror at home. Without a word, they stepped around the group, their movements fluid and coordinated, like water flowing around rocks in a stream. Their shoes clicked softly against the floor as they walked away, leaving Callie's group standing there, momentarily thrown by their calm response. But that was only the beginning. The next day, Zara opened her math homework to find orange juice soaked through the pages, making the numbers run together. She caught Brent's satisfied smirk from across the room, but kept her face neutral as she pulled out a fresh sheet of paper and began recopying her work. During English class, Zuri returned from the bathroom to find her desk covered in sticky notes. "Go back to the hood," one read. "Project Rat," said another. She gathered them quietly, folded them neatly, and tucked them into her pocket before sitting down. Her expression never changed. The hallways became a gauntlet of whispered words thrown like darts. Hood rats, gorillas. Each slur was carefully timed, when teachers weren't looking, when the twins were alone. But Zuri and Zara maintained their practiced smiles, walking past with straight backs and steady gazes, just as they'd been taught. In science class, Ms. Ray moved through the room handing back graded tests. When she reached the twins' table, she placed their papers between the pages of their open textbooks. Zuri noticed something else tucked between the pages, a printed article that hadn't been there before. Later, safely in the quiet of the library, the twins examined the paper together. It was a biography of Claudette Colvin, the 15-year-old girl who had refused to give up her bus seat months before Rosa Parks. Certain passages were underlined in neat pencil marks. She knew her constitutional rights and decided to stand up for them. And sometimes it's better to be quiet and let your actions speak for themselves. There was no note, no explanation. But when they passed Ms. Ray in the hallway later that day, her dark eyes met theirs for just a moment. In that look was understanding, acknowledgement, and something else. A quiet strength that resonated with what their brother had been teaching them. That evening, the twins entered their living room to find Micah sitting rigidly on the couch, his eyes fixed on the TV news. The reporter's voice filled the room. Incident occurred outside the local high school, where security cameras captured the assault of a black teenager by multiple students. The footage played, showing a familiar scene, a group surrounding a single figure, the flash of phones recording, the sudden violence. Micah's jaw clenched, the muscles in his neck standing out. The twins passed through the room silently, their footsteps soft on the carpet. Micah clicked off the TV, the screen going black. For a moment he sat in silence, then turned to look at his sisters. Without a word, he nodded toward the backyard. The twins understood. The next morning they were outside before the sun, the grass wet with dew beneath their feet. The training was different this time. Micah moved them through new forms, blocking stances that could deflect incoming strikes, quick footwork that could create space or close it, balance exercises that taught them how to stay centered even when pushed. Control your body. Micah's voice was low and steady as he adjusted Zara's stance. Control the room. He moved to Zuri, demonstrating how to shift weight from one foot to the other without telegraphing the movement. The twins moved through the forms again and again, their breathing controlled, their movements becoming more fluid with each repetition. The rising sun cast their shadows long across the dewy grass as they practiced, preparing for whatever might come next. In the distance, a car alarm went off, but the twins didn't flinch. They maintained their focus, their balance, their control, just as they'd been taught, just as they would need to. The autumn breeze rustled through the playground as Zuri and Zara walked across the blacktop during recess. Their matching navy uniforms and neat braids caught the sunlight as they moved with their characteristic grace. A group of fourth graders huddled near the jungle gym, their eyes following the twins' movement. "Look at them," one of the younger kids whispered, not quite quietly enough. "They never get mad. Not ever. I think they're witches." The words carried on the wind, reaching the twins' ears. Neither showed any reaction, maintaining their steady pace as they headed toward their usual spot by the fence. Behind them, the whispers grew, spreading from one cluster of students to another like ripples in a pond. Some children edged away when the twins passed, pressing themselves against the brick walls or ducking behind playground equipment. Others drew closer, emboldened by the rumors, watching with a mixture of fear and fascination. A few boys started making exaggerated hand gestures, pretending to cast spells whenever the twins walked by. The playground had become a stage, and everyone was watching to see what would happen next. Later that afternoon, Zara sat alone under the old oak tree at the edge of the schoolyard, her science textbook open on her lap. The shade provided a quiet refuge from the chaos of recess, and she lost herself in the chapter about cellular division. She was so absorbed in her reading that she didn't notice Eliza approaching from behind. The younger girl moved with exaggerated stealth, encouraged by the giggles of her friends watching from a safe distance. When she was close enough, Eliza reached out and yanked one of Zara's braids, hard. In a fluid motion that seemed almost supernatural in its speed and control, Zara's hand shot up and caught Eliza's wrist mid-pull. She didn't squeeze or twist, just held it firmly in place. Zara's face remained perfectly calm as she turned to meet Eliza's eyes, her gaze steady and unblinking. The playground seemed to hold its breath. Eliza stood frozen, her wrist caught in Zara's grip, fear replacing the mischief in her eyes. The moment stretched out, heavy with tension, until Zara slowly released her hold. Without a word or change in expression, she turned back to her book. Eliza stumbled backward, tears welling in her eyes before turning and running toward the school building. Her friends scattered like startled birds, whispering among themselves about what they'd just witnessed. The cafeteria was crowded and noisy during lunch period, filled with the clatter of trays and the buzz of conversation. The twins sat at their usual table, carefully unpacking their lunches with the same precise movements they always used. They didn't look up when Callie approached, her designer shoes clicking against the linoleum floor. "Oh my goodness, I'm so clumsy." Callie's voice rang out with theatrical concern as she accidentally stumbled, sending her carton of milk flying. The white liquid splashed across the twins' uniforms, soaking into the navy fabric and dripping onto their carefully prepared lunches. The cafeteria ladies behind the counter didn't bother to hide their amusement, their laughter mixing with the snickers from nearby tables. Callie stood with her hand pressed to her mouth in mock horror, her eyes gleaming with satisfaction. The twins didn't flinch. They didn't cry out or jump up or show any sign of distress. Instead, they calmly pulled napkins from their lunch bags and began dabbing at their clothes. Then, as if nothing had happened, they continued eating their now milk-soaked lunches, their movements as measured and dignified as always. The drive home that afternoon was heavy with silence. Micah's eyes kept finding the twins in his rearview mirror, taking in their damp uniforms and the way they sat perfectly still, hands folded in their laps. His knuckles were white on the steering wheel, but he didn't say a word. He understood that sometimes silence spoke louder than any words could. That evening, in her tastefully decorated home office, Callie's mother picked up her phone and dialed Principal Hargrove's private number. Her voice was sharp with artificial concern as she detailed her worries about the twins. "They're having an unsettling effect on the other children," she said, her tone careful and measured. "My daughter tells me the younger students are actually afraid of them. As PTA president, I can't ignore the parents' concerns about safety." Principal Hargrove sat at his desk, phone pressed to his ear, nodding along. "I understand completely," he replied, his voice smooth and professional. "We take student safety very seriously here at Belridge." "They need to be watched more closely," Callie's mother insisted. "We can't have them terrorizing the other children with their behavior." "I'll review their records first thing in the morning," Principal Hargrove assured her, despite knowing there wasn't a single incident report filed against the twins. "We have programs in place for situations like this." The next morning, as students filed into their first period classes, a secretary appeared at the twins' classroom door. "Zuri and Zara," she called out, her voice clipped and official. "Please come with me to the principal's office." The twins gathered their books and rose in unison, following the secretary through the quiet hallways. In Principal Hargrove's office, they sat in the two large chairs across from his desk, their feet barely touching the floor. Principal Hargrove didn't look up from his papers as he spoke. "Due to recent concerns about student safety, you'll both be enrolled in our Student Safety Review Program, effective immediately." He pushed two identical forms across his desk. "This means additional supervision during all school activities and regular check-ins with our guidance counselor." The twins stared at the forms, which listed no specific incidents or violations, no explanations for this sudden intervention. Just official-looking letterhead and a lot of fine print about maintaining a secure learning environment. Principal Hargrove finally looked up, his expression neutral but his eyes cold. "That will be all," he said, dismissing them with a wave of his hand. "The secretary will give you your new schedule on your way out." The morning sun cast long shadows through the blinds of the administrative office as Zuri and Zara sat in hard plastic chairs waiting. The secretary's keyboard clicks filled the silence until Vice Principal Matthews emerged from her office, holding two small black boxes. "Girls, these are part of our Student Safety Review Program," she explained, her voice professionally detached. She opened the boxes to reveal what looked like sleek fitness trackers, but there was something institutional about their design. "They're behavioral trackers. You'll need to wear them during school hours." The twins watched as she removed the devices, simple black bands with small blinking lights and digital displays. Vice Principal Matthews approached them with the practiced efficiency of someone who wanted to complete an unpleasant task quickly. "Your right wrists, please," she instructed, fastening the bands with small clicks that seemed too loud in the quiet office. Zuri looked down at the device now secured to her wrist, its weight unfamiliar and intrusive. The small green light pulsed steadily, like a tiny heartbeat. "Do other students wear these?" she asked, her voice calm but pointed. Vice Principal Matthews shuffled some papers on her desk, avoiding Zuri's direct gaze. "It's just a precaution," she replied, the words coming out rehearsed and hollow. "For everyone's safety." The twins exchanged a brief glance, noting the non-answer. When they returned to their classroom, the reaction was immediate. Heads turned, whispers erupted, and fingers pointed at their new accessories. Ms. Peterson continued writing on the whiteboard as if nothing was happening, her chalk scraping against the surface with deliberate focus. "Ooh, are those ankle monitors for your wrists?" Sawyer called out from the back of the room, his voice carrying over the murmurs. Several students laughed, others just stared. Ms. Peterson's chalk paused for a moment, then continued its movement across the board. Her silence spoke volumes. Throughout the day, the twins noticed Brent's phone appearing whenever they passed by. He would pretend to text or take selfies, but the camera was always aimed in their direction. In the hallways between classes, he and his friends would suddenly appear, blocking their path or bumping into them accidentally. "Come on, aren't you mad?" Brent would taunt, his phone held low but clearly recording. "Don't you want to do something about it?" The twins maintained their practiced calm, moving around the obstacles like water flowing around rocks. But sometimes the accidental collisions were harder than they appeared, leaving marks that wouldn't show until later. That evening, as Zuri reached for a glass in the kitchen, her sleeve pulled back slightly. Micah, washing dishes nearby, caught sight of the purple-blue marks on her arm. His hands stilled in the soapy water, but he didn't turn around. "It's nothing," Zuri said quietly, pulling her sleeve back down. "Just bumped into something." Micah dried his hands slowly, methodically. He didn't press the issue, but his jaw tightened as he finished the dishes in silence. Later that night, after the twins had gone to bed, Micah drove to a quiet diner on the outskirts of town. Sheriff Elijah Knox was already there, sitting in a corner booth away from the windows. Despite the late hour, he was still in uniform, his badge catching the fluorescent light as Micah slid into the seat across from him. "Thanks for meeting me," Micah said, his voice low. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small flash drive, placing it on the table between them. Elijah picked up the drive, turning it over in his hands. "What am I looking at?" "Everything so far. The safety program they put the girls in, the tracking devices, the incidents that never make it into official reports." Micah's voice was controlled, but his eyes were intense. "Start tracking what they're doing to my sisters. If anything happens, we expose it." Elijah pocketed the drive, his expression grave. "I'll keep this safe and I'll start my own documentation." The next morning, the twins walked through the fluorescent-lit hallways of Belridge Elementary, their steps measured and synchronized as always. The black bands on their wrists blinked red now, a constant reminder of their surveillance. As they passed the science lab, Ms. Ray stood in her doorway organizing papers. She looked up as they approached, her eyes immediately drawn to the tracking devices. For the first time since the twins had started at Belridge, her carefully neutral expression cracked, revealing a deep frown. "You don't deserve that," she said suddenly, her voice quiet but firm. "Not even close." The twins paused, surprised by this unexpected break in Ms. Ray's usual silence. She reached into her desk and pulled out a worn paperback book, handing it to Zuri. "Sister Outsider," the cover read. The lunch bell rang and the twins made their way to the cafeteria. The familiar routine played out. They were served last, their food was cold, and the whispers followed them to their isolated table. But they sat down with the same calm smiles they always wore, their tracked wrists resting on the table as they ate their lunch in peaceful silence. 2 days passed like a slow-moving current, each moment carrying the twins closer to what felt inevitable. The cafeteria buzzed with its usual lunchtime chaos, the clatter of plastic trays, overlapping conversations, and the scrape of chairs against linoleum floors. Zuri and Zara sat at their usual table near the back wall, carefully spreading napkins across their laps as they had been taught. Brent's voice cut through the noise, artificially loud. "Oh no, watch out." The twins looked up just as he stumbled forward with exaggerated motion, his tray tilted at a precise angle. Time seemed to slow as the contents, a bowl of lukewarm spaghetti, chocolate milk, and applesauce, cascaded onto Zara's lap. The red sauce splattered across her pristine uniform, creating a stark contrast against the white fabric. Zara's body tensed instinctively, her hands gripping the edge of the table, but her face remained carefully neutral, even as the cold liquid seeped through to her skin. In her peripheral vision, she caught the glint of Brent's phone, held at waist level, its camera lens focused directly on her. Laughter erupted around them like a wave washing over the cafeteria. Some students pointed openly, while others tried to hide their amusement behind their hands. A few looked away uncomfortably, but no one spoke up. "My bad," Brent said, his voice dripping with false sincerity. "Let me help you clean that up." He made no move to actually help, instead ensuring his phone captured every moment of Zara's discomfort. The cafeteria monitors stood by the wall, engaged in their own conversation, apparently oblivious to the scene unfolding before them. Later that evening, as darkness settled over Belridge, Brent sat in his bedroom, carefully editing the video. He trimmed and clipped until he had exactly what he wanted, a version that showed Zara's movement as she stood up from the table, but removed the context of his accident. With a few taps, he uploaded the modified footage to a private community parent group on social media. The caption read simply, "Aggressive much." It didn't take long for the comments to start rolling in. Parents who had never met the twins felt emboldened to share their opinions behind the safety of their screens. "Why are they even here?" wrote one mother whose profile picture showed her hugging her smiling children. "I knew they'd be trouble," commented another parent. "My daughter told me they're always causing problems." "This is what happens when we lower our standards," someone else chimed in. The comments continued to pile up, each one more vitriolic than the last, building a narrative that had nothing to do with reality, but everything to do with pre-existing prejudices. In the twins' home, the soft blue glow of Micah's laptop screen illuminated his face as he scrolled through the comments. The twins sat on the couch across from him, their hands folded in their laps, just as they had been taught. They didn't need to read the comments themselves. They could see everything they needed to know in the tight set of their brother's jaw and the growing darkness in his eyes. Finally, Micah closed the laptop with a quiet but decisive click. He looked at his sisters, his expression heavy with understanding and barely contained anger. "They're cornering you on purpose," he said, his voice low and controlled. "I won't always be around." The twins absorbed his words in silence, understanding the weight of what he wasn't saying as much as what he was. The strategy that had protected them so far, their careful neutrality, their practiced smiles, was being weaponized against them. The next morning arrived with a sense of foreboding. The twins were already seated in their first period class when Principal Hargrove's voice crackled over the intercom system, filling every classroom in Belridge Elementary. Would Zuri and Zara please report to the principal's office immediately? The public nature of the summons was deliberate. There was no need to call them over the intercom when a simple note would have sufficed. Students turned in their seats to stare at the twins as they gathered their things and stood up. Their movements were synchronized and calm, but the weight of every eye in the room pressed against them like a physical force. Principal Hargrove was waiting behind his desk when they arrived, his expression stern and self-righteous. Without greeting them or asking them to sit, he turned his computer monitor toward them. The edited video played silently, showing the carefully selected moment where Zara stood up, stripped of all context. "This kind of behavior is exactly why we implemented the Student Safety Review Program," Hargrove said, his voice carrying the practiced disappointment of someone who believed they held the moral high ground. "You're instigating conflict, creating an unsafe environment for other students." The twins remained silent, their faces carefully blank as they stood before his desk. Their wristbands caught the fluorescent light, the small displays suddenly shifting from their usual green to a warning yellow. "Nothing to say in your defense?" Hargrove pressed, leaning forward slightly. When they didn't respond, he sat back in his chair with a satisfied air. "Very well. You may return to class, but consider this an official warning. Any further incidents will result in more serious consequences." The walk back to their classroom felt longer than usual. When they finally pushed open the door, the familiar scene awaited them. Every head turned, every eye fixed on them, particularly on their wristbands, which now pulsed yellow, marking them as high-alert students. They made their way back to their seats, ignoring the whispers that followed them. Their wristbands continued to flash yellow, a constant reminder of how quickly their careful control could be turned against them. The yellow school buses lined up outside Belridge Elementary on Friday afternoon, their doors hissing open to welcome students for the annual camping trip. Excitement bubbled through the crowd of sixth graders as they lugged sleeping bags and backpacks toward the waiting vehicles. But for Zuri and Zara, the atmosphere felt heavy with unspoken tension. Ms. Ray stood by the first bus, checking names off her clipboard. When the twins approached, her eyes lingered on their behavioral trackers, still blinking yellow from the previous day's incident. She pressed her lips together but said nothing as she marked them present. "Your tent assignment is Zone D, Spot 12, she said quietly, holding out a map. "It's a bit removed from the main camping area." Zuri took the paper without comment, but both girls noticed how their designated spot sat at the very edge of the campground, practically touching the tree line. Isolated. Exposed. Callie brushed past them as they studied the map, her designer camping gear looking suspiciously new and unused. She turned to her friends, speaking just loud enough to be heard. "At least we won't have to worry about them contaminating the main camp." Laughter rippled through her group as they boarded the bus, phones already out and recording. Brent caught Zuri's eye and smirked, making a show of adjusting his camera angle. The hour-long bus ride passed in tense silence. While other students chatted and sang camp songs, the twins sat perfectly still, watching trees blur past their window. They had done this before, being separated, isolated, marked as different. But something about this time felt different, more deliberate. When they arrived at Camp Evergreen, the autumn air was crisp and clean. Students scrambled off the buses, racing to claim the best tent spots within their assigned zones. The twins walked slowly to their designated area, well away from the excited chaos of their classmates. Their tent was simple to set up. They had practiced in their backyard with Micah. As they worked, they could hear distant laughter and conversation from the main camp, the sounds carrying clearly across the open space between them and their classmates. As evening approached, a counselor's whistle called everyone to the central fire pit for s'mores and ghost stories. The twins found seats on a log at the edge of the circle, careful to maintain their usual calm demeanor, despite the growing darkness and the way Brent and Sawyer kept circling behind them. "Watch out for the Blair Witch," Sawyer whispered as he passed. "I heard she likes to take people who don't belong." Brent chuckled, his phone glinting in the firelight. "Maybe we'll get lucky and they'll disappear by morning." The twins kept their eyes forward, focused on the dancing flames as other students took turns telling increasingly outlandish horror stories. But their attention never wavered from the movement behind them, their breathing steady and controlled just as Micah had taught them. When the counselors called for a final head count before bed, Zara reached into her pocket for her inhaler, a habit before sleep. Her fingers found empty space. Panic flashed across her face for just a moment before she schooled her expression back to neutrality. "Looking for this?" Callie emerged from the shadows between two trees, holding Zara's inhaler up so it caught the light from the dying campfire. Her smile was sharp in the darkness. "Dropped something?" she said sweetly, then turned and disappeared into the woods. The twins exchanged a quick glance. They knew it was a trap. They knew they should report it to a counselor. But they also knew how that would play out. Their word against Callie's, and they'd seen how that story ended before. Without a word, they followed the beam of Callie's flashlight into the trees. The path wasn't long, but every step took them further from the safety of the campfire's glow. They emerged into a small clearing, where moonlight filtered through the branches overhead. They weren't surprised to find Callie wasn't alone. 6 students stood in a loose circle around the clearing's edge. Brent, Sawyer, and 4 others, whose faces were hidden behind phone screens and flashlight beams. The lights created a disorienting effect, making it hard to focus on any one person. Brent stepped forward into the center of the circle, his phone held high to capture whatever came next. His confidence seemed to grow with each step, fed by the audience behind their lights. "Say something now," he taunted, moving closer. "Come on, hit me, give us a show." The twins stood perfectly still, their shadows merging into one dark shape on the forest floor. Zara's hand twitched slightly at her side, but Zuri reached out and gently pushed it down. Their breathing remained steady, synchronized. "Now?" Zara whispered, so soft only her sister could hear. Zuri's response was equally quiet. "Now." What happened next was like a choreographed dance, but one their tormentors hadn't expected. The twins exploded into motion, their movements precise and controlled. Years of early morning training with Micah transformed into pure action. Zuri moved left while Zara went right, their footwork perfect on the uneven ground. A quick sweep took Brent's legs out from under him, while a controlled strike sent his phone spinning into the darkness. He hit the ground hard, all his bravado turning to gasping breaths. The others stumbled backward, but the twins were already moving. A series of quick, efficient strikes, nothing wasted, nothing excessive. Phones clattered to the ground as their owners scrambled to get away. Someone's flashlight hit a tree trunk and cracked, its beam going dark. When stillness returned to the clearing, the twins stood side by side, their breathing still measured and calm. Not a single braid had come loose, not a uniform wrinkle in sight. Below them, Brent struggled to sit up, his eyes wide with shock and fear. Zuri looked down at him, her voice quiet but clear in the sudden silence. "We're done here." The twins turned as one and walked away, leaving their stunned classmates in the moonlit clearing. Their footsteps were silent on the path back to camp, their posture perfect, their faces serene. They had finished exactly as Micah had taught them. No hesitation, no excess, no doubt. The morning sun hadn't yet burned through the fog when the first police cruiser pulled into Camp Evergreen's parking lot. Its lights weren't flashing, but the mere presence of law enforcement cast a heavy shadow over what should have been a routine camp breakdown. Students were still rolling up sleeping bags when Principal Hargrove's voice crackled over the camp's PA system. "Zuri and Zara Williams, please report to the main office immediately." The twins emerged from their isolated tent, perfectly composed despite the early hour. They'd been awake since dawn, sitting cross-legged on their sleeping bags, waiting. They knew this moment would come. Mrs. Keating intercepted them halfway to the office, her usual too bright smile replaced by a tight-lipped frown. "This way, girls," she said, leading them to the camp director's cabin where several adults were already gathered. Through the window, they could see Judge Colburn's imposing figure. He stood with his arms crossed, his judicial authority seeming to fill the small space even in casual clothes. Beside him, Brent sat in a chair, holding an ice pack to his jaw. His eyes were red, but the twins couldn't tell if it was from crying or lack of sleep. Principal Hargrove opened the door before they could knock. "Come in," he said, his tone clipped and formal. The room smelled of coffee and tension. Two police officers stood against the back wall, their presence more symbolic than practical. Judge Colburn stepped forward, his height casting a shadow over the twins. "My son was assaulted last night," he stated, each word measured and heavy. "We have video evidence." Principal Hargrove picked up a tablet from the desk and turned it toward them. The video was already queued up, a shaky 15-second clip that started with Zuri's final strike and ended with Brent on the ground. No context, no lead-up, just the explosion without the fuse. "This kind of violence cannot be tolerated," Hargrove said, setting the tablet down. "The school board is convening an emergency hearing this afternoon." The twins remained silent, their faces neutral. They'd learned long ago that words could become weapons in the wrong hands. By noon, the video had spread through every parent group and local social media channel in Belridge. The camping trip was officially canceled, and buses arrived early to transport students home. As the twins boarded their assigned bus, whispers followed them like shadows. They just snapped. "I always knew they were dangerous." "Did you see what they did to poor Brent?" The emergency hearing was scheduled for 2 p.m. in the school board's conference room. The twins sat perfectly straight in their chairs, hands folded in their laps, while adults filtered in around them. Their behavioral trackers still blinked yellow, seeming to pulse in time with the fluorescent lights overhead. Micah arrived just before the hearing began, Sheriff Elijah Knox close behind him. The sheriff's presence caused a ripple of murmurs through the room. He took a seat near the back, his expression unreadable as he surveyed the scene. Principal Hargrove stood at the podium, his voice grave as he addressed the board. "What we witnessed in this video was an unprovoked act of violence against another student. These behavioral trackers," he gestured to the twins' wrists, "were implemented for exactly this reason. We had concerns about their aggressive tendencies, and sadly, those concerns have been validated." Judge Colburn spoke next, his legal expertise adding weight to every word. "My son required medical attention. The bruising on his jaw is severe. This was not some schoolyard scuffle. This was a calculated attack." The video played again on the large screen behind them. Without context, It looked damning. Zuri's strike appeared vicious rather than controlled. The twins' calm demeanor afterward seemed cold instead of disciplined. "I am recommending immediate indefinite suspension," Hargrove concluded. "Furthermore, I suggest we review their enrollment status for the upcoming semester." Throughout it all, Sheriff Knox remained silent. He sat with his hands clasped, watching each speaker with the same intense focus. The twins recognized his expression. It was the same one they'd been taught to maintain. Observe, record, wait. The board members whispered among themselves before delivering their verdict. Immediate suspension, pending a full investigation. The twins would not be allowed to return to school until further notice. That evening, the twins sat in their bedroom, the silence between them heavy with unspoken words. Their behavioral trackers had been deactivated and removed, but they could still feel the phantom weight on their wrists. The sunset painted their walls in shades of orange and red when Zuri finally spoke, her voice soft but determined. They made their story. Time we make ours. The door creaked open and Micah entered carrying something in his hand. He moved with the careful precision they'd come to associate with their morning training sessions. But tonight there would be no physical drills. He slid a small black pouch across their desk, the material making a soft, scratching sound against the wood. The twins watched as it came to rest between them, understanding that whatever was inside would change everything. Zuri reached for the pouch first, opening it carefully. Inside lay two tiny lapel microphones, their black surfaces absorbing the dying sunlight. "Record everything," Micah said simply. The twins looked at the microphones, then at each other. They didn't need words to communicate what they both knew. This was more than just evidence collection. This was armor. This was power. This was truth. The weekend brought a quiet tension to Belridge. While most residents enjoyed their Saturday morning routines, Sheriff Elijah Knox pulled his unmarked car into the public library's back parking lot. The building was mostly empty this early, just as he'd planned. Ms. Ray was already waiting in one of the private study rooms, a weathered cardboard box on the table beside her. Her usual composed demeanor seemed slightly altered. There was an urgency in her movements as she began pulling out manila folders, their edges soft and yellow with age. "These aren't the first," she said simply, spreading the documents across the table. Her voice was barely above a whisper, but in the library's silence, each word carried weight. Elijah pulled up a chair, his trained eye immediately scanning the scattered papers. Student files dating back 2 decades lay before him, each one telling a similar story. Black and brown faces stared up from old ID photos, their young expressions a mix of hope and wariness. He picked up the nearest file. Marcus Thompson, 2003, expelled for persistent noncompliance with behavioral standards. The photo showed a boy no older than 13, wearing a crisp uniform and a careful smile. Ms. Ray nodded, pulling out another file. Sarah Jenkins, 2007, removed from general population due to volatile tendencies. She laid the file next to Marcus's. She was 12, honor roll student. One day she argued with a teacher who kept calling her by the wrong name. File after file told the same story. Different names, different years, but identical patterns emerged. Uncooperative. Disruptive influence. Adjustment difficulties. The language was always vague, always suggesting danger without specifying threats. Elijah moved to the library's computer terminal, logging into the school district's digital archive with his law enforcement credentials. Ms. Ray stood behind him, watching as he cross-referenced dates, names, and incident reports. The pattern became impossible to ignore. Over 20 years of student safety review program records revealed a stark truth. Every single student placed under surveillance had been black or brown. Not a single white student had ever worn the tracking devices now bound to Zuri and Zara's wrists. "They built a system," Elijah said, his voice tight with controlled anger. "Made it look like protection when it was really about control." Ms. Ray pulled out a fresh notebook and began documenting everything they found. Dates, names, specific language used in reports. She worked with the precision of someone who had been waiting years for this moment. Elijah started assembling a formal case file, carefully photographing each document with his phone. "We need to establish the pattern," he explained. "Show how the same language, same procedures, same outcomes keep repeating." Meanwhile, across town, Zuri and Zara prepared for their return to school. Their suspension wasn't lifted, but they were required to attend certain meetings, a peculiar limbo designed to keep them visible, but powerless. Monday morning found them back in Belridge Elementary's hallways, their behavioral trackers blinking steadily. Students whispered as they passed, but now the twins had a new purpose. Hidden beneath their neat collars, the tiny microphones captured every word. "Look who's back. Better watch out, they might karate chop you. Guess they couldn't find another school to take them." In class, teachers stumbled over their names, mixing them up or avoiding calling on them entirely. The microphones recorded each hesitation, each correction, each small erasure. Ms. Ray watched from her usual distance, but now her silence had meaning. When she handed back their science worksheets, tiny notes appeared in the margins. "Watch the patterns. Name the silence." Her guidance was subtle but clear. Document everything. The twins developed a system. Between classes, they would switch memory cards in the bathroom, carefully logging times and locations. Every dismissive gesture, every accidental shoulder check, every whispered slur was captured and categorized. Callie and her friends provided plenty of material. They'd grown bolder since the camping incident, convinced the twins were now powerless. Their taunts became more direct, more vicious, all while maintaining perfect deniability if adults were present. That afternoon, Zuri sat in the computer lab, carefully uploading the day's first audio file to Micah's encrypted folder. The recording was crystal clear, Callie's voice dripping with false sweetness. "Let's see if monkeys bleed." Zara leaned over her sister's shoulder, watching the file transfer complete. "Micah's gonna love this one," she said, her voice carrying a hint of satisfaction. In his apartment across town, Micah received the notification. He opened the file, listened once, and added it to his growing collection of evidence. "Just the start," he replied via secure message. "Keep feeding me." The twins continued their careful documentation throughout the day. Every interaction became potential evidence, every dismissal another data point in their growing case. Their behavioral trackers might monitor their movements, but they were doing some tracking of their own. Ms. Ray passed them in the hallway between periods, her expression neutral, but her eyes conveying approval. On their desks, they found new handouts with more tiny notes in the margins. "Detail is power. Timestamps matter. Build the record." They were learning a different kind of strength now. Not the physical discipline Micah had taught them, but the power of meticulous documentation. Every recording, every noted incident, every carefully logged interaction was another brick in the wall of truth they were building. The behavioral trackers on their wrists continued to blink, but they no longer felt like shackles. Instead, they had become reminders, visible proof of a system that needed to be exposed. The very devices meant to monitor them were now part of their evidence, their constant blinking a timestamp for every recorded incident. In the library, Elijah and Ms. Ray continued building their case file, adding historical context to the twins' current documentation. 20 years of systematic discrimination was beginning to take shape on paper, each incident connecting to form a clear pattern of institutional bias. As the school day ended, Zuri and Zara headed home, their microphones still recording. They had learned to move through the halls with perfect composure, their faces revealing nothing while their devices captured everything. They were no longer just students trying to survive. They had become careful chroniclers of their own experience, gathering proof of what everyone had always denied. Monday morning arrived with a heavy stillness at Belridge Elementary. The disciplinary office, with its stark walls and uncomfortable chairs, felt more like a courtroom than a schoolroom. Zuri and Zara sat perfectly straight, their pressed uniforms and neat braids a stark contrast to the tension in the air. Their behavioral trackers blinked steadily, red lights reflecting off the polished conference table. Principal Hargrove settled into his chair at the head of the table, surrounded by school board members in business attire. His smile didn't reach his eyes as he shuffled through a stack of papers, deliberately taking his time. "We're here today," he began, his voice carrying that practiced tone of false concern, "to discuss the violent incident at the school camping trip. He paused, looking directly at the twins. "We just want to ensure a safe learning environment for everyone." The way he emphasized everyone made it clear who he thought needed protecting. The twins remained still, their faces carefully neutral, just as Micah had taught them. The meeting room's projector hummed to life, and Hargrove began playing the now familiar footage. The video, grainy and shaky, showed only the final moments. Zuri's precise strike, Brent falling backward, phones scattering in the darkness. The board members murmured, shaking their heads with rehearsed disapproval. "As you can see," Hargrove continued, "this kind of aggressive behavior simply cannot—" "You forgot the part where 6 of them trapped us in the woods." Zuri's voice cut through the room, calm but firm. Every head turned toward her. Without breaking eye contact with Hargrove, Zara reached into her backpack and withdrew a small USB drive. The simple action carried weight as she slid it across the polished table surface. The plastic scraped quietly against wood, coming to rest directly in front of the principal. "What's this supposed to be?" Hargrove asked, not reaching for it. One of the board members, curiosity overtaking protocol, picked up the drive and inserted it into the laptop connected to the projector. Clear audio filled the room. "Come on, jungle bunnies, show us what you got. Let's see if monkeys really do swing." Nobody's around to help you now. The racial slurs and threats continued, each word crystal clear in the recording. The board members shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Hargrove's face tightened as he tried to maintain his composure. From her seat along the wall, Ms. Ray moved for the first time. She had been so quiet, some might have forgotten she was there as faculty support. Now she stepped forward, placing a single printed page on the table. The paper was filled with dates, names, and outcomes, a timeline spanning years. "Every student placed in the safety review program in the past 20 years, she said quietly. "Every suspension under similar circumstances." Her finger traced down the list. All black students, all with the same vague justifications for punishment. The room erupted into chaos. Board members began talking over each other, some demanding explanations, others trying to change the subject. Hargrove's face had turned an interesting shade of red as he attempted to regain control of the meeting. "This is completely inappropriate," he sputtered. "We're here to discuss one specific incident, which appears to be part of a pattern," one of the younger board members interrupted, still studying Ms. Ray's timeline. The twins remained silent, watching the adults argue across the table. Their behavioral trackers continued blinking, recording their perfect stillness while chaos swirled around them. The meeting devolved into a tense standoff. Some board members wanted to review all the evidence. Others insisted on sticking to protocol. Hargrove kept trying to steer the conversation back to the twins' violent tendencies, but the audio recording had changed the atmosphere in the room. After an hour of circular arguments, no decision was reached. The meeting was adjourned, pending further review of all materials. The twins gathered their things and left the office, their faces revealing nothing. That evening, while most of Belridge was settling in for dinner, 3 figures met at Jerry's Diner on the edge of town. Sheriff Elijah Knox slid into a booth where Micah and Ms. Ray were already waiting, a pot of coffee between them. The diner was quiet, just the occasional clink of plates and murmur of conversation from other booths. The fluorescent lights cast a harsh glow over their serious faces as they leaned in close. "We're almost there," Elijah said, keeping his voice low. "The audio is damning, and Ms. Ray's documentation of the pattern is solid. I just need the full footage from camp." Micah nodded, stirring his untouched coffee. "Already working on it. One of the kids dropped their phone during the confrontation. My contact at the repair shop is pulling everything off it tonight." Ms. Ray added another document to their growing pile, her movements careful and precise. "The school board is splitting. Some of them had no idea about the pattern. Others—" She trailed off, but her meaning was clear. Meanwhile, back at home, Zuri and Zara sat cross-legged on their bedroom floor. Scattered around them were torn pages from their science textbooks, the latest casualty of their classmates' escalating harassment. Rather than throw them away, they were carefully arranging the defaced pages on their wall. Each torn page, each scribbled slur, Each crude drawing was placed with purpose. The wall was becoming a visual record of everything they'd endured. Next to the pages, they'd pinned transcripts of their recordings, official suspension notices, and printed screenshots of threatening messages. "They'll see it all," Zuri said quietly, smoothing down the corner of a particularly damaged page. The behavioral trackers on their wrists continued blinking in the dim room, but now they seemed less like restraints and more like witnesses to their careful documentation. The fluorescent lights of the district IT building cast an eerie glow across the empty parking lot. At 11:47 p.m., Micah's dark figure moved silently toward the side entrance, his military training evident in every calculated step. The security badge, borrowed from Elijah, felt heavy in his palm as he approached the card reader. A soft beep and green light granted him access. The night guard's desk sat empty, exactly as planned during Elijah's scheduled security audit. Micah's boots made no sound on the linoleum as he navigated the maze of cubicles toward the server room. The server room hummed with the sound of cooling fans and blinking lights. Rows of black metal cabinets lined the walls, each containing terabytes of district data. Micah pulled out a small notebook, checking the server numbers Ms. Ray had provided. His fingers traced along the rack labels until he found what he needed: security archives, external sites. The flash drive slid into the port with a soft click. Lines of code scrolled across his laptop screen as the retrieval script did its work. Micah's eyes darted between the door and the progress bar, counting seconds in his head. The script finished its run and Micah quickly disconnected everything. He erased all traces of his presence with practiced efficiency, leaving the server room exactly as he'd found it. Within minutes, he was back in his car, the flash drive secure in his pocket. At home, Micah's laptop cast a blue glow across his face as he began reviewing the recovered footage. The campground security system had been more thorough than Brent and his friends realized. The mess tent camera caught them planning, huddled together and pointing toward the twins' isolated tent. Another angle showed them stealing Zara's inhaler from her backpack while she was distracted. But it was the clearing footage that made Micah's jaw clench. The camera, mounted on a tree for wildlife monitoring, captured everything in stark clarity. 6 students surrounding his sisters, phones out like weapons. Brent's swagger as he moved in close, taunting them. "Come on, show us what you really are." Brent's voice came through clearly on the audio. "Your kind always snap eventually." The footage showed Zuri and Zara backing away, hands raised. "We don't want trouble," Zara said calmly. "Just give back the inhaler." "Make us," Callie taunted, dangling the inhaler just out of reach. The video captured every moment of escalation, the circle tightening, the flashlights becoming more aggressive. The twins repeated warnings, each one calm and clear. "Step back. This isn't smart." Last warning. When the attack finally came, the footage showed exactly what Micah had trained them for. No wasted movement, no excessive force, just precise defensive techniques that left their attackers sprawled and stunned. Meanwhile, across town at Belridge Elementary, the morning buzz was different than usual. Callie stood frozen in front of her locker, staring at the bright red spray paint that spelled out, "You started it," across the metal door. Students gathered to whisper and take photos, but scattered quickly when she turned around. The hallways had taken on a different energy. Where once there had been open mockery of the twins, now there were sidelong glances and hushed conversations. Students pressed against walls when Zuri and Zara passed, not out of disgust, but something closer to unease. Even the teachers seemed on edge. Mrs. Keating no longer called on the twins in class, and Mr. Peterson started checking his phone nervously whenever they raised their hands. The behavioral trackers on their wrists still blinked, but now they seemed less like marks of shame and more like warnings to others. In the science lab, Ms. Ray was preparing for her next class when she noticed the manila envelope on her desk. No return address, no markings. Inside, she found a single sheet of paper, a staff memo dated 2010. Her eyes narrowed as she read Principal Hargrove's familiar signature at the bottom. "To all staff regarding new transfer students, please exercise additional precaution and vigilance. Watch for signs of volatility, especially among certain demographic groups who may have difficulty adjusting to Belridge's academic standards. Document all concerning behaviors, no matter how minor. Remember, prevention is key to maintaining our school's reputation. Principal Hargrove. Below the memo was a student file. Marcus Thompson expelled in 2010 for aggressive behavior after defending himself against 3 white students who had cornered him in the gym. The circumstances were eerily similar to the twins' situation, right down to the selective video evidence used against him. Ms. Ray carefully tucked the documents into her secure drawer, adding them to her growing collection of evidence. Her hands trembled slightly, but her face remained composed as students began filing in for class. The day wound down with an unusual quietness. Even Brent, usually quick to perform for his audience, kept his head down and avoided eye contact. The twins moved through their classes with the same careful grace they always showed, but now it carried a different weight. That evening, Micah sat in his home office, the completed video file ready for upload. His phone showed Elijah's number as he made the call. "Got the footage," Micah said without preamble. "Uncut. Everything from the planning to the aftermath. Time to pull the pin." There was a moment of silence on the other end, then Elijah's steady voice. "Send it over. I'll handle the rest." Later that night, a new account appeared on social media. Belridge Exposed. Its first post was a simple video titled Chapter 1, with a description that read, "The truth about what really happens at Belridge Elementary. No edits, no lies, just raw footage." The video began to upload, its progress bar slowly filling as the town slept, unaware of what morning would bring. The sun hadn't yet risen over Belridge when phones started buzzing across town. The video spread like wildfire through group chats and social media, each share adding to the growing storm. Parents watched in horror as the unedited footage revealed the full story, not just the carefully cropped version they'd been shown before. The camera caught everything. Brent and his friends stalking the twins through the campground. The whispered slurs, the stolen inhaler, the deliberate isolation. When the confrontation finally played out, there was no mistaking who the aggressors were. "Look at the monkeys dance!" Callie's voice rang clear through the phone speakers as she dangled Zara's inhaler just out of reach. "Your kind always shows their true colors," Brent taunted, moving closer with his phone raised. "Come on, give us a show." The footage showed the twins backing away, hands raised peacefully. "We don't want trouble," Zuri said clearly. "Just give back the inhaler and let us go." By the time the first school buses pulled up to Belridge Elementary, the parking lot was already filled with angry parents. News vans lined the street, their satellite dishes reaching toward the gray morning sky. Reporters clutched microphones and coffee cups, waiting for comment. Inside the main office, chaos reigned. Parents crowded the front desk, their voices rising over each other. "Those poor girls were defending themselves," a mother in a business suit demanded. "Where were the teachers?" "They're dangerous," another parent countered. "They should be expelled immediately." Principal Hargrove's secretary repeatedly announced that he was in meetings and unavailable for comment. Behind his closed office door, Hargrove sat at his desk, blinds drawn, watching the security feed of the growing crowd outside. In the hallways, the usual social dynamics had shifted dramatically. Students who normally clustered around Brent and Callie now gave them a wide berth. When Brent tried to high-five a teammate from the basketball team, the boy turned away quickly, suddenly fascinated by his locker contents. Callie found herself sitting alone in English class, empty chairs on all sides. Even her closest friends seemed to have urgent reasons to be elsewhere. Her carefully constructed social throne had crumbled overnight. The cafeteria at lunch became the stage for another shift. The twins sat at their usual isolated table, perfectly composed, despite the whispers and stares around them. A boy from their math class, Thomas, approached slowly, lunch tray in hand. Without a word, he sat down across from them. The cafeteria fell silent, watching. Then Sarah, a quiet girl who had witnessed some of Callie's worst bullying, stood up with her tray. She walked deliberately to the twins' table and sat down. One by one, other students followed, some who had been bystanders, some who had their own stories of being targeted. By the end of lunch period, the twins' table was full, while Brent, Callie, and Sawyer sat alone in different corners of the room. Online, the story was growing. Former Belridge students began sharing their experiences, each one eerily similar to the twins' ordeal. Marcus Thompson, class of 2010, posted first. I was expelled for aggressive behavior after 3 white students jumped me in the gym. The school only showed the part where I fought back. Sound familiar? Jasmine Williams, class of 2015, shared next. They put me in special behavioral monitoring after I reported racial harassment, said I was too sensitive and causing trouble. I transferred out rather than wear their tracking device. More stories appeared throughout the afternoon. Each post tagged with number Belridge exposed gained hundreds of shares. Local news stations began picking up the story, running headlines like "Systemic Racism Allegations at Local Elementary School" and "Former Students Speak Out Against Pattern of Discrimination." In their last period science class, Zuri noticed Ms. Ray watching them with quiet pride as more notifications lit up their phones. "It's not just us now," Zuri whispered to her sister, a small smile playing at her lips. As the final bell rang and students filed out past the news crews, Principal Hargrove slipped out through a side door. He drove carefully through back streets to avoid being followed, parking behind an abandoned strip mall on the edge of town. Judge Colburn's black SUV was already waiting there, along with Patricia Henderson's luxury sedan. As PTA president and Callie's mother, Patricia had been instrumental in maintaining the school's carefully crafted image. They gathered in the empty storefront, speaking in low voices despite being alone. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting harsh shadows on their worried faces. "This is getting out of hand," Hargrove said, loosening his tie. "The school board is calling for an investigation." Judge Colburn paced the dusty floor. "We need to get ahead of this. Make them look unstable. Question their credibility before this goes any further." Patricia Henderson nodded, reaching into her designer handbag. "I still have Zara's school psych file from their intake evaluation. She cried during the assessment. Couldn't handle basic questions about her family situation." She pulled out a manila folder. "If this gets leaked, it'll paint a very different picture of our perfect little twins." "Are you sure?" Hargrove asked, eyeing the file. "Leaking confidential student records?" "Better than letting them destroy everything we've built," Judge Colburn cut in. "One emotional outburst, one sign of mental instability. That's all we need to shift the narrative." Patricia smiled tightly as she handed over the file. "By tomorrow morning, everyone will be questioning whether we can trust the word of a troubled child who breaks down during simple conversations. Who knows what other emotional problems she's hiding?" The 3 conspirators huddled closer, their shadows merging on the wall as they planned their counterattack, unaware that their very meeting was being recorded by a small device hidden in the ceiling vent, courtesy of Sheriff Elijah's foresight and Micah's careful planning. Thursday morning dawned cold and clear over Belridge Elementary. Sheriff Elijah Knox's police cruiser pulled into the nearly empty parking lot, its tires crunching over frost-covered asphalt. He adjusted his badge, tucked a thick manila envelope under his arm, and strode through the front doors with purposeful steps. The main office was quiet this early, with only the soft hum of computers and coffee brewing in the corner. Principal Hargrove's secretary looked up, startled by the sheriff's unexpected arrival. "Good morning," Elijah said, his voice carrying the full weight of his authority. "I need to see Principal Hargrove immediately." "He's not available right now," the secretary began, but Elijah was already moving past her desk. He pushed open Hargrove's office door without knocking. The principal sat behind his desk, phone to his ear, but the words died on his lips when he saw who had entered. "I'll call you back," Hargrove said quickly, hanging up. His practiced smile didn't reach his eyes. "Sheriff Knox, what brings you here so early?" Elijah dropped the manila envelope on Hargrove's desk with a heavy thud. "This is a formal subpoena for all internal emails and suspension files dating back 15 years. Every single one." The color drained from Hargrove's face as he stared at the envelope. His hands trembled slightly as he reached for it. This is highly irregular," Hargrove stammered, scanning the document. "These are confidential student records. There are privacy concerns, procedures to follow." "The procedures are outlined in that subpoena," Elijah cut in. "You have 48 hours to comply." Hargrove's jaw tightened. I'll need to consult with our legal team. The school board has protocols. You can resist it, Elijah said, leaning forward. But I'll be back. With the state. His words hung in the air like frost. Your choice, Principal Hargrove. Across the building, in Ms. Ray's empty classroom, a different kind of truth was being unveiled. The twins sat quietly at their usual desk as their science teacher pulled an old yearbook from her bottom drawer. Her hands shook slightly as she opened it to a marked page. This was my brother, Marcus, she said softly, pointing to a young boy's smiling face. He was 13 when this photo was taken. 3 months later, he was expelled for defending himself against 3 white students who cornered him in the gym. The twins leaned forward, studying the familiar warm brown eyes and bright smile that echoed Ms. Ray's own features. They only showed the school board the part where he fought back, Ms. Ray continued, her voice steady despite the pain in her eyes. Just like they did with you. They labeled him violent, unstable, a threat to school safety. The same words, the same playbook. Nothing's changed. She closed the yearbook gently. He spiraled after that, ended up in the juvenile system, died there 6 months later. Her words fell like stones in the quiet classroom. They said it was suicide, but he had bruises all over his body. Zuri and Zara sat in respectful silence, their own experiences casting new shadows in the light of this revelation. I've spent the last 10 years gathering stories, Ms. Ray said, opening another drawer filled with carefully organized files. Working behind the scenes, documenting every case, every pattern, making sure Marcus wasn't forgotten and making sure when the moment came we'd have proof. Later that morning, Micah met the twins in an empty stairwell, pressing small, flesh-colored earpieces into their hands. These connect directly to my phone, he explained in hushed tones. I'll relay updates throughout the day. If you hear anything suspicious, press once to record, twice to send it straight to me. The twins nodded, fitting the devices carefully into their ears. They blended perfectly, invisible unless you knew exactly where to look. The new equipment proved its worth just hours later. Zara was returning from the bathroom when she heard familiar voices around the corner. She pressed against the wall, holding her breath. We need to get to Mrs. Chen's laptop, Brent whispered urgently to Sawyer. She's got all the old discipline reports saved there. My dad says they could prove. How do we get to it? Sawyer asked. After school. She always leaves it in her desk. We'll make it look like an accident. Spilled water or something. Zara's finger pressed once on her earpiece, recording every word. When they moved away, she pressed twice, sending the audio straight to Micah. Within minutes, her earpiece crackled softly. Got it. Micah's voice came through clearly. Already forwarding to Elijah. Good work. That evening, after the halls had emptied and the last bus had departed, Micah stood in the twins' bedroom. The wall before him had transformed into a massive collage. Newspaper clippings, social media screenshots, printed emails, and photographs. Each piece told part of the story of systemic racism at Belridge Elementary. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a worn photograph. Ms. Ray's brother at 13, his smile bright and unaware of what lay ahead. Carefully, he added it to the wall. The sound of footsteps made him turn. Zara stood in the doorway, holding another photograph. She moved forward silently and taped it next to Marcus's picture, a recent photo of herself, the same age, with the same bright smile. Zuri appeared beside her sister, studying the 2 photos side by side. They buried him, she said softly. We're digging him back out. The 3 siblings stood before the wall, their shadows stretching long behind them as the setting sun painted the room in shades of amber and gold. The photos of Marcus and Zara seemed to glow in the fading light. 2 children separated by time but connected by the same struggle, the same system, the same need for justice. The morning sun streamed through Belridge Elementary's tall auditorium windows, casting long shadows across rows of metal folding chairs. By 8 o'clock, the space had filled to capacity. Parents clutched coffee cups and whispered among themselves. Teachers sat in tight clusters, their faces drawn with concern. Local news crews huddled near the walls, cameras ready. Zuri and Zara sat in the front row, their posture perfect, hands folded in their laps. Micah flanked them on one side, his military bearing evident in his rigid spine and watchful eyes. Sheriff Elijah Knox sat on their other side, a thick portfolio resting on his knees. Ms. Ray joined them quietly, settling into the chair beside Micah. Her usual calm demeanor carried an electric undercurrent of determination. Principal Hargrove stood at the podium, shuffling papers with trembling hands. The school board members sat behind him at a long table, their expressions carefully neutral. The board chair, Dr. Martinez, leaned forward to adjust her microphone. "This emergency session of the Bell Ridge Elementary School Board will now come to order," she announced, her voice echoing through the packed auditorium. "Principal Hargrove has requested to speak first regarding recent events." Hargrove cleared his throat, his practiced smile failing to mask his nervousness. "In light of recent distortions and misrepresentations of our school's disciplinary procedures, point of order." Sheriff Knox's voice cut through the air like a blade. He stood, portfolio in hand, commanding immediate attention. "Before Principal Hargrove continues, I believe the board should review new evidence that's come to light." Dr. Martinez nodded. "Proceed, Sheriff Knox." Elijah moved to the podium as Hargrove reluctantly stepped aside. He opened his portfolio and began laying out documents on the board's table. "What you're looking at is a 15-year pattern of discriminatory practices at Bell Ridge Elementary," Elijah stated, his voice steady and clear. "Every student placed in the Student Safety Review program has been black or brown. Every single one." He played audio clips through the auditorium speakers, the twins being harassed, Brent and his friends planning their ambush, Callie's threats. The sound quality was crystal clear, leaving no room for doubt. "And this," Elijah continued, nodding to a tech assistant who started a video, "is the complete footage from the camping trip incident." The screen showed everything: Callie stealing Zara's inhaler, the group of students surrounding the twins in the woods, the racial slurs, the threats. When it reached the moment of the twins' defensive moves, the context was undeniable. Several parents gasped. One teacher started crying. Ms. Ray stood then, walking slowly to the podium. Her hands shook slightly as she gripped its edges, but her voice remained strong and clear. "My name is Rachel Thompson," she began. "I've taught science at Bell Ridge for 12 years. But my connection to this school goes back further." She pulled out a worn piece of paper. "This is my brother Marcus's expulsion letter from 2010. He was 13 years old." The room fell silent as Ms. Ray recounted her brother's story. She described the attack by 3 white students, how the school only showed the board the moment Marcus defended himself, how they labeled him violent and dangerous. Her voice caught slightly as she described his death in juvenile detention, but she pressed on. "For 12 years I've watched it happen again and again," she continued. "Different children, same pattern, same words in their files: unstable, aggressive, threatening." She lifted a thick manila envelope. "This packet contains every case I've documented, every problem student removed, every safety concern that somehow only applied to children of color." She placed the envelope on the board's table. "My brother's story isn't just history. It's happening right now, in this school, to these girls." She gestured to Zuri and Zara. "The only difference is this time, we have proof." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Several board members were already flipping through Ms. Ray's documentation, their faces growing increasingly troubled. From their seats, Zuri and Zara watched Callie, who sat with her mother several rows back. The girl who had tormented them for months looked small now, her face pale, her usual confidence shattered. When Callie caught their gaze, she quickly looked away. Dr. Martinez called for a brief recess to review the new evidence. The tension in the room was palpable as the board members huddled together, speaking in urgent whispers while examining the documents. When they returned to their seats, Dr. Martinez's expression was grave. She leaned into her microphone. "Based on the evidence presented today, this board is declaring an immediate investigation into systematic misconduct and racial targeting at Bell Ridge Elementary." She paused, letting the words sink in. "Principal Hargrove will be placed on administrative leave, effective immediately, pending the results of this investigation. Hargrove's face drained of color. He started to protest, but Dr. Martinez held up her hand, silencing him. As people began filing out of the auditorium in stunned silence, Zuri turned to her sister. "It's breaking," she whispered. Zara's eyes gleamed with quiet determination. "So let's push." The evening news flickered across TV screens throughout Belridge, casting an eerie blue glow in living rooms as families gathered for dinner. The headline scrolled beneath a stern-faced anchor. Violent twins had emotional problems. School records reveal instability. Callie's mother, Amanda Porter, had orchestrated the leak perfectly. Local news stations jumped on the story, broadcasting carefully selected excerpts from Zara's psychological evaluation. They highlighted phrases like difficulty adjusting and emotional outbursts during assessment, stripping them of context and weaving them into a narrative of instability. In the twins' living room, Micah stood rigid, his jaw clenched as he watched the coverage. Zuri and Zara sat on the couch, their expressions unchanged, while the reporter detailed how Zara had cried during her initial school evaluation. "They're desperate," Micah said, his voice low and controlled. "Using a child's private medical records. That's low, even for them." Social media exploded with renewed vitriol. Comment sections filled with armchair diagnoses and thinly veiled racism disguised as concern for school safety. Parents from Belridge's online community groups shared the story widely, adding their own speculation about the twins' mental state. "These unstable children shouldn't be in regular classes," one comment read. "Who knows what they might do next?" posted another. "This proves Hargrove was right all along," a third declared. The twins maintained their routine, completing homework at the kitchen table while Micah worked his phone, coordinating with Elijah. Their calm felt almost supernatural against the storm raging online. 3 hours after the initial leak, Elijah's counter-move struck like lightning. A new document appeared on local news sites, an internal memo from Principal Hargrove to his staff, dated 2 years prior. The language was clear and damning. All Black transfer students should be flagged for immediate psychological screening. Note any signs of aggression or non-compliance, no matter how minor. Document everything. We'll need it later. The memo continued with specific instructions on how to build cases against these students, including suggestions to interpret physical responses broadly and note any resistance to authority. Ms. Ray chose this moment to break her usual silence. She appeared on the evening news, sitting straight-backed in her classroom, speaking with quiet authority. "For years I watched them use mental health screenings as weapons," she said, her voice steady. "They'd trigger children with hostile environments, document their natural responses to racism, then use those responses to label them as unstable." She paused, looking directly into the camera. "They weaponized mental health against Black children. Not anymore." Her interview spread rapidly across social media platforms, resonating with thousands who shared similar experiences. A popular podcast, Education Nation, picked up the story, dedicating an entire episode to examining Belridge's history of discriminatory practices. The podcast host's voice carried through earbuds and car speakers across the country. "What we're seeing at Belridge isn't just about two 12-year-old girls. It's about a system that turns mental health support into a tool for discrimination. But these twins, through their remarkable composure, have exposed something much bigger." Clips of Zuri and Zara's calm responses to harassment, their controlled defense at the camping trip, and their dignified silence during accusations began circulating online. Their quiet strength became a symbol of resistance against systemic racism in schools, yet the twins themselves remained offline, untouched by their growing symbolic status. While social media debated their story, they maintained their routine with military precision. At 4 a.m. the next morning, they were in the backyard with Micah, moving through their training exercises. The pre-dawn air was crisp, their breath visible in small clouds as they practiced their forms. "Remember," Micah instructed, watching their stance transitions, "they'll try to use your strength against you. Make it look like anger." "We know," Zuri replied, executing a perfect block. "They already tried," Zara added, mirroring her sister's movement. Their phones buzzed periodically with interview requests and messages of support. all left unanswered. They remained focused on their training, their schoolwork, and their long-term goal: systematic change. Later that afternoon, the school's official email arrived in every parent and student's inbox. The subject line read, "Important update regarding Student Safety Review Program." The carefully worded message explained that the program was being re-evaluated in light of recent developments, and that all current monitoring measures will be suspended pending review. Zuri saw the email notification pop up on her phone. Without opening it, she pressed delete and returned to her homework. Zara looked up from her own studies, a slight smile playing at the corners of her mouth. "They're not re-evaluating," she said quietly. "They're unraveling," Zuri finished. In their shared bedroom, the wall of evidence continued to grow. Newspaper clippings, printed emails, transcripts, and photos. The latest addition was a printout of Hargrove's leaked memo, positioned next to Ms. Ray's brother's photograph. The contrast told its own story, past and present, connected by a thread of systemic racism finally being pulled apart. Monday morning arrived at Belridge Elementary with an unfamiliar heaviness. The usual cacophony of student chatter had been replaced by something more subdued, a weighted silence punctuated only by the sound of shuffling feet and closing lockers. The hallways, typically alive with gossip and laughter, felt like a museum where everyone walked on tiptoe, afraid to disturb the exhibits. Students who once participated in the daily ritual of taunting now kept their eyes down, their shoulders hunched with the weight of collective shame. When the twins passed through the corridors, their presence created ripples of uncomfortable awareness. Classmates who had laughed at Brent's videos or shared Callie's cruel jokes now pressed themselves against lockers, making way as if the girls were surrounded by an invisible force field. The cafeteria, usually a battleground of social hierarchies, had transformed into a stark illustration of falling empires. Brent, Sawyer, and Callie sat at their usual table, a spot that had once been the center of social gravity. Now it was an island, surrounded by empty seats that no one dared to fill. The three of them picked at their food, their former confidence replaced by defensive glances and nervous whispers. Brent's phone lay face down on the table, no longer the weapon it had once been. Sawyer's usual smirk had vanished, replaced by a tight-lipped grimace. Callie, perhaps feeling the weight of her mother's actions most heavily, sat with her shoulders curved inward, making herself as small as possible. Other students gave their table a wide berth, some making obvious detours to avoid passing near them. The same peers who had once vied for spots at their lunch table now clustered at distant corners, stealing glances and whispering behind their hands. The isolation was complete and self-imposed, a quarantine of guilt. Zuri and Zara entered the cafeteria with their usual measured grace, collecting their lunch trays without fanfare. They chose their regular spot, neither seeking nor avoiding attention. A few students nodded to them as they passed, small gestures of acknowledgement that would have been unthinkable just weeks ago. The morning crawled by with this new, uncomfortable energy until precisely 11:45 a.m., when Sheriff Elijah Knox's patrol car pulled into the school's parking lot. He emerged in full uniform, his badge catching the midday sun, and carried a leather portfolio containing multiple warrants. His footsteps echoed through the administrative wing as he walked directly to the main office, his presence commanding immediate attention. The office staff fell silent as he entered. Principal Hargrove, who had returned briefly to close out files following his suspension, looked up from his desk with poorly concealed alarm. In the adjacent room, Amanda Porter, Callie's mother, was meeting with the school board president, likely trying to manage the fallout from her leaked documents. Elijah's voice carried through the thin walls as he read the charges. "Amanda Porter, you're under arrest for unauthorized access and distribution of protected student records, data theft, and violation of minor privacy laws." The click of handcuffs punctuated his words. As Amanda Porter was led out, her face flushed with indignation, Elijah turned to Hargrove. "Principal Hargrove, you're under arrest for obstruction of justice, destruction of evidence, and bias-related misconduct in an educational institution." The second pair of handcuffs closed with a decisive snap. Outside, the scene unfolded like a carefully choreographed drama. News vans had already gathered, their satellite dishes reaching toward the sky like mechanical flowers. Reporters stood ready with microphones and cameras, capturing every moment as the two prominent community figures were led to separate patrol cars. Students pressed against classroom windows, phones held high to record the spectacle. The footage began appearing on social media almost immediately, accompanied by captions that ranged from shocked to vindicated. The same devices that had once broadcast the twins' supposed misbehavior now documented justice being served. The crowd that gathered was largely silent, watching with a mixture of awe and discomfort as their former principal, the man who had wielded such careful, quiet power, was reduced to a figure in handcuffs, ducking into the back of a police car. The image was powerful. The system that had protected him now turned to hold him accountable. When the final bell rang that afternoon, the twins emerged from the building to find Elijah waiting by his car. His uniform was crisp, his expression serious but warm as they approached. The day's events had left him tired but satisfied, like a man who had completed a long-planned mission. "What they tried to bury," he began, reaching into his car for a manila envelope. "You dragged into the sun." He handed the document to Zuri, who opened it carefully. Inside was an official notice clearing them of all disciplinary actions, their records wiped clean of the manufactured incidents that had been used against them. Micah, who had arrived to pick up his sisters, stood nearby, his arms crossed over his chest. He looked at the paper, but didn't smile. "But that's not the win," he said quietly, his voice carrying the weight of someone who understood the larger picture. Zuri nodded, her expression unchanged as she held the document. "No," she agreed, her voice clear and steady. "The win is that everyone knows." She didn't need to elaborate. Everyone understood exactly what she meant. Everyone knew about the systematic targeting of Black students. Everyone knew about the manipulation of records, the weaponization of mental health evaluations, the careful construction of a system designed to push out children of color while maintaining a veneer of proper procedure. Everyone knew about the silent complicity, the carefully worded emails, the coded language used to justify discrimination. But most importantly, everyone knew that it could be exposed, documented, and dismantled, not through violence or chaos, but through careful strategy, unwavering dignity, and the simple power of truth brought to light. The twins stood together in the afternoon sun, their shadows stretching long across the school parking lot. They didn't smile or celebrate. They didn't need to. The empty document in their hands was just paper. The real victory was written in the changed atmosphere around them, in the shifted power dynamics, in the knowledge that would never again be buried. A week had passed since the arrests, and Belridge Elementary was slowly finding its new rhythm. The morning sun filtered through the windows of the main office, now occupied by Ms. Ray in her role as interim principal. The space had undergone a dramatic transformation from its previous incarnation under Hargrove's leadership. Gone were the imposing leather chairs and intimidating desk arrangement that had made students feel small and powerless. Instead, Ms. Ray had created a minimalist sanctuary. Bookshelves lined the walls, filled with carefully chosen volumes that spoke of history, justice, and hope. Student artwork brightened the spaces between them, each piece selected not for technical perfection, but for the story it told. On her simple desk sat a single framed photograph, a teenage boy with a bright smile and eyes that held both mischief and determination. Her brother's image served not as a decoration, but as a daily reminder of why she was here, why every decision mattered. The photo faced her chair, ensuring that every choice she made was witnessed by the very reason she'd spent years gathering evidence and waiting for the right moment to act. The morning light caught dust motes dancing in the air as Ms. Ray heard familiar footsteps approaching her office. She had specifically requested this meeting first thing, before the usual bustle of the school day could interrupt what needed to be said. The twins arrived exactly on time as she'd expected. Their uniforms were pressed as always, their braids neat, their expressions composed. "Come in," Ms. Ray said, gesturing to two comfortable chairs she'd positioned to face her desk at an angle that encouraged conversation rather than confrontation. Please, have a seat. Zuri and Zara moved with their characteristic synchronization, settling into the chairs with the same quiet dignity they'd maintained throughout their entire ordeal. Ms. Ray noticed how they automatically scanned the room, taking in the changes, noting the exits, habits that spoke of lessons learned too young. She reached into her desk drawer and withdrew 2 sealed envelopes, each bearing official letterheads from prestigious institutions. The paper was heavy, expensive, the kind that carried weight, both literal and symbolic. She placed them carefully on the desk, sliding them toward the twins. College prep programs, she explained, her voice carrying the warm authority that had become her trademark. High school mentorships, you've earned them. She paused, letting the significance of the opportunity sink in. These weren't just programs, they were doorways to futures that Belridge had tried to deny them. Zara looked at the envelopes but didn't reach for them immediately. We're not done here yet, she said, her voice firm but not confrontational. It was a statement of fact, not a challenge. Ms. Ray's lips curved into a slight smile. I know, she acknowledged, leaning forward slightly. But we can build while we fight. She gestured to the student artwork surrounding them. Change isn't just about tearing down the old, it's about creating something better in its place. The conversation shifted then, moving from the immediate present to the broader future. Ms. Ray outlined her vision for rebuilding Belridge's culture from within. Not just policy changes, but fundamental shifts in how the school approached education, discipline, and community. We need to create spaces where students feel seen, she explained, not watched. Where differences are celebrated, not tolerated. Where strength isn't measured by how much pressure you can take, but by how much support you can give. The twins listened intently, their expressions thoughtful. They understood what wasn't being said, how this kind of change required both visible leadership and invisible support, both spotlight moments and quiet, persistent work in the shadows. I'd like you to consider something, Ms. Ray continued, choosing her words carefully. There are younger students here who need mentors. Not official positions, nothing formal. Just quiet guidance. The kind of support that doesn't draw attention but creates real impact. Zuri and Zara exchanged a glance. One of those silent conversations that only twins seemed capable of having. Then they nodded in unison. They didn't need to voice their agreement. Their preference for meaningful action over public recognition was already well established. The meeting concluded naturally, with no need for grand declarations or formal agreements. The twins gathered their belongings and the envelopes, standing with the same fluid grace they always displayed. As they headed toward the door, Ms. Ray watched them, seeing echoes of her brother's determination in their straight backs and steady gazes. The hallway outside the office had changed since their last visit. The blank wall that had once served as a canvas for taped-up insults was now transformed. A mural spread across its surface, still being completed by the art department. The image was striking in its simplicity. 2 black girls with matching braids, standing back to back, their calm eyes locked ahead. The artists had captured something essential about the twins. Not just their physical appearance, but the quiet power they embodied. The twins paused before the mural, taking in their own likenesses rendered in bold colors and confident strokes. Neither spoke. Words weren't necessary for this moment. But Zara's face softened, and for the first time in weeks she smiled, a genuine expression that reached her eyes and lightened her whole countenance. The smile wasn't just about the artwork, it was about everything it represented. The acknowledgement of their struggle, the recognition of their dignity, and most importantly, the promise of change they had helped set in motion. It was a smile that suggested that while they weren't done fighting, they could also celebrate the victories along the way. The Tuesday morning sun streamed through the high windows of Belridge Elementary's auditorium, casting long rectangles of light across the gathered students. The usual morning chatter was subdued, an undercurrent of tension running through the assembled crowd as they filed into their seats. Principal Ray stood on the stage, her posture relaxed but professional, alongside the district superintendent, Dr. Martinez, who adjusted his tie with practiced ease. Zuri and Zara sat in the middle section, neither drawing attention to themselves nor hiding. Their presence had taken on a different quality in recent weeks, less like targets and more like quiet pillars that had weathered a storm. Students around them maintained a respectful distance, not out of fear but something closer to deference. The absence of Brent, Callie, and Sawyer was conspicuous. Their usual seats in the front row, where they had once held court like minor royalty, remained empty. The vacancy spoke volumes, creating a pocket of charged silence that seemed to ripple through the room. Principal Ray stepped forward to the microphone, her movements measured and deliberate. The ambient noise in the auditorium settled into complete silence as she began to speak. "Good morning, Belridge," she said, her voice carrying the same steady authority that had guided the school through recent weeks of upheaval. "Dr. Martinez and I have an important announcement regarding some changes in our student body." She paused, allowing the weight of her words to settle. The superintendent stepped forward, his expression serious but not severe. "Following a thorough investigation and in accordance with district policies regarding student safety," Dr. Martinez began, his tone clinical and precise. "3 students have been transferred to the State Reform Academy for juvenile rehabilitation, effective immediately. This decision was made in response to documented incidents of harassment and physical endangerment." Though no names were mentioned, everyone knew exactly who he meant. The silence that followed his announcement was absolute. No whispers, no shuffling, not even the usual cough or sneeze that typically punctuated such gatherings. It was as if the entire student body was holding its breath, processing the reality that actions truly could have consequences. Principal Ray returned to the microphone. "This decision wasn't made lightly," she continued, "but it reflects our commitment to ensuring every student's safety and dignity. Moving forward, we will be implementing new programs and policies to prevent similar situations from developing." The assembly concluded without applause. None was expected or appropriate. As students filed out into the hallway, the atmosphere was charged with something different than the usual post-assembly energy. It wasn't celebration or relief, but rather a collective recognition that something fundamental had shifted in their school's social landscape. As Zuri and Zara made their way through the corridor, heading to their next class, something unexpected happened. A small group of students approached them, not with the usual hesitation or avoidance, but with purpose. Among them was Emma, a quiet girl from their math class who had never spoken to them before. "Thank you," Emma said softly, her eyes meeting theirs directly for the first time. "I didn't know we could say no." Others joined her, not with grand gestures or dramatic apologies, but with small nods of acknowledgement as they passed. Some simply made eye contact and offered slight smiles, tiny gestures that carried the weight of newfound respect and understanding. Throughout the day, this pattern continued. Students who had once been silent observers of their harassment now acknowledged them in small but meaningful ways. It wasn't performative allyship or sudden friendship. It was something more genuine, recognition of the change they had catalyzed. Later that afternoon, Ms. Ray called the twins into her office. The space had become familiar to them now, a sanctuary of sorts where important conversations happened without pretense or performance. "The district has approved our grant proposal," she announced, sliding a document across her desk. "We're getting funding to establish a justice literacy program here at Belridge." The twins leaned forward to examine the paperwork. The program outline was comprehensive, focusing on teaching students to understand and navigate systemic inequities while developing tools for constructive resistance. "I'd like you both to help develop the curriculum," Ms. Ray continued. "After hours, of course, nothing public or official, just your insight and experience helping to shape what we teach." Zuri and Zara exchanged a look, then nodded their agreement. They understood the value of working behind the scenes, of creating change without seeking credit. The program took shape quickly. Small groups of students, a diverse mix of black, brown, and white children, began meeting in Ms. Ray's classroom after school. The twins helped guide discussions about recognizing coded language in school rules, understanding de-escalation techniques, and practicing forms of quiet resistance that didn't compromise dignity or safety. These sessions weren't about creating conflict. They were about building understanding and resilience. The younger students absorbed these lessons eagerly, recognizing the practical value of what they were learning. As the week drew to a close, a different kind of change approached. Early Friday morning, Micah stood in their driveway, loading his duffel bag into his truck. His military leave was ending, calling him back to active duty. The twins stood with him in the pale morning light, their usual training time now transformed into a moment of goodbye. Micah pulled them both into a tight hug, his familiar strength wrapping around them one last time before his departure. When he pulled back, his eyes were proud but thoughtful. "I trained you to fight," he said, his voice rough with emotion, "but you trained them to look up." The twins watched in silence as he climbed into his truck, the engine rumbling to life in the quiet morning air. As his vehicle disappeared around the corner, Zara turned to her sister. "It's quiet now," she observed, her voice carrying neither victory nor sadness, just recognition of a truth. Zuri met her gaze, understanding flowing between them as it always had. "Let's make something with it," she replied simply. The late summer breeze rustled through the trees as Zuri and Zara approached Bell Ridge Elementary on the first day of the new school year. They walked with the same measured grace they'd always possessed, but something was different. They stood taller now, their shoulders straight, not from tension but from quiet confidence. Their braids were still neat, their uniforms still pressed, but the black wristbands that had once marked them as monitored were conspicuously absent. The familiar double doors opened to a hallway that felt transformed. Gone was the suffocating atmosphere of whispered slurs and sideways glances. Instead, a calm settled over the space, broken only by the normal sounds of students preparing for class. The twins moved through the corridor, and while heads still turned in their direction, the looks were different now. Acknowledgement rather than accusation. Their footsteps echoed against the polished floor as they made their way to their lockers. Last year, these metal doors had been constant targets for vandalism, cruel messages scratched into the paint, accidentally spilled drinks that left sticky residue, mysterious dents that appeared between classes. Now they stood clean and unmarked, just two lockers among many. As they stored their books, Zuri noticed the walls around them. Where blank space had once dominated, new posters caught the eye. Bold text proclaimed student rights and anti-discrimination policies. One poster detailed the anonymous reporting system, complete with QR codes and clear instructions. Another showed diverse faces and the words, "Your voice matters," in multiple languages. The bell rang and they headed to their first class, Science with Ms. Ray. The classroom arrangement had shifted. Their seats were now in the front row, not hidden away in corners where trouble could find them unseen. As they settled into their chairs, Ms. Ray looked up from her desk. Her nod of greeting wasn't the careful, coded signal of last year, a warning or an alert. Instead, it carried the warmth of family, simple and true. The class filled quickly, students finding their places with the usual first-day shuffle. Ms. Ray began taking attendance, moving down her list with careful attention to each name. When she reached Zuri, she hesitated slightly, clearly working to form the syllables correctly. Before she could continue, a hand shot up from the middle of the room. Sarah Chen, a quiet girl who had never spoken to the twins last year, pointed out gently, "I think it's pronounced differently, Ms. Ray." Ms. Ray smiled, thanked Sarah, and asked Zuri to pronounce her name correctly. After repeating it properly, she continued with the roll call as if nothing extraordinary had happened. But something had shifted. A small moment that would have been unthinkable months ago had passed without drama or tension. During lunch period, the twins walked past the newly completed mural that stretched along the main hallway. The painting had evolved over the summer, growing more complex and meaningful with each edition. The central image remained, two girls standing back to back, their calm gazes fixed on different horizons. But now, in the background, three shadowed faces emerged from the warm colors. These faces belonged to students from years past, their expressions both solemn and knowing. The mural's title was written in elegant script across the top. "We didn't start the fire, we remembered the match." No signature indicated the artist's identity, though rumors circulated about who might have added which elements. The only official marking was a small brass plaque that Ms. Ray had installed beneath the artwork, providing context without naming names. The afternoon sun slanted through the windows as the final bell rang, casting long shadows across the empty hallway. Zuri and Zara stood before the mural one last time before heading home. The painted faces seemed to watch them with understanding, acknowledging a shared history of silence and resistance. Zara broke the quiet first, her voice barely above a whisper. "They thought we were dangerous." Zuri's response came with the same quiet certainty that had carried them through the past year. "We were. Just not in the way they feared." As they turned to leave, their backpacks slung over their shoulders, a folded paper fell from Zuri's science textbook. It was a note from Micah, left before his deployment. His familiar handwriting carried words that echoed through the empty hallway. "You were never the threat. You were the mirror." They just hated what they saw. The twins walked toward the exit, their footsteps steady and synchronized. The afternoon light caught their profiles, casting twin shadows that stretched long behind them, not as threats, but as reminders of what strength really looked like when it refused to break. The setting sun painted the mural in shades of gold and shadow, highlighting the faces of past students who had walked these halls before them. Their stories, once buried, now lived on these walls, not as casualties but as witnesses to a change that had been long overdue. As Zuri and Zara pushed through the front doors into the warm afternoon, the school stood quiet behind them. The building that had once felt like a battlefield had transformed into something else. Not perfect, not completely healed, but aware. The silence that followed them now wasn't the heavy quiet of suppression, but the peaceful calm of understanding. The day ended as it had begun, with two sisters walking side by side, their presence no longer a challenge but a reminder. They had changed Belridge not by shouting, but by standing firm. Not by fighting, but by forcing others to see themselves clearly. The mirror they had become reflected not just the darkness they had faced, but the light that had always existed within these walls, waiting for someone brave enough to let it shine. If you enjoyed the story of Zuri and Zara, I handpicked this next story that you will enjoy. Please don't miss this one. Click here to watch it.